So tonight, I have a special treat for you. We're going to go back into the past through a time machine in this beautiful building. This is a great place to do it. And we'll start our story like this. you hear what I'm going to say? That was just the beginning to let you get a hint, a sense, a feeling of what mid-century modern is. And this picture is a 19...
Sorry.
Okay. So that showed me. Thank you so much for trying. So this is a picture taken in 1965 of what was visioned by some of the early mid-century modern architecture of what the south big bank of the riverside of the river would look like in Jacksonville. And you can see the Caecilian and the riverside and the back at the back. So what is mid-century modern? I guess you absorbed a little bit based on what you just saw, but that's just a small part of it. So let's think about what is mid-century modern. This is not mid-century modern. Just because a building was built in the mid-1900s doesn't mean it was mid-century modern. And just because a building was mid-century modern doesn't mean it was built just in 1950s or 60s. We'll see that mid-century modern kept going and branching in different ways that we still call mid-century modern, even up into the 1980s, so forth. So mid-century modern was a movement, not just a fad, but a movement that covered everything from art to furniture to cars and mostly architecture. And it was definitely an idea of looking to the future, a whole change of what the future could be of our city. There were all these young architects, and they weren't architects, they were just brilliant young people who took the GI-4, the GI Bill after the World War, and they got the GI Bill to pay for their way to go to architectural school. And they went on and had these great visions of what could happen in America. Here you see some of the new modern technologies and with concrete and plate glass windows. This is, by the way, Taylor Hardwick standing under JED school. And he had all these visions, ideas. Was one of our great early visionaries. So it was an idea of creativity, of excitement, of what modern world we could lay before us. And these young architects who grabbed onto this excitement were inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright, Harry Sarin, and other radical architects who had dominated the pre-World War II era. And the idea was, as Frank Lloyd Wright used to say, form follows function. The idea was that there was clean lines, and the building materials themselves became part of the ornament of the buildings themselves. And inside, outside, all flowed together. Frank Lloyd Wright wanted his rooms to flow one to the other. And here you see many of these houses are connected inside and out with the flow of nature. And there were clean lines of geometric forms that could not have been used earlier, but now with all these new technologies and different types of concrete shapes, these forms could make a whole new world. And they were beautiful as well as futuristic. Now, one of my great friends, Taylor Hardwick, who's now gone, he showed this idea called folded plate roofs, and I'm going to show you what he meant. I'm copying his idea, but this is fun. So if you hold a piece of paper like this, it folds. And if you have a thin piece of concrete, it tends to sag. But if you fold it, that you can use a folded plate wrench roof that holds only 3 inches thick of concrete. In addition to that, you can cantilever. And cantilever means you can balance on a fulcrum instead of in the middle. Like this, you could have big overhangs, balconies, and roofs that stick out way. After the program tonight, please go outside and see some of Bob Brower's cantilevered balconies that are just stunning, that protrude out into the air 15 or 20 feet tall with folded plate roofs. And we connected nature, brought the inside to the outside, making new plate glass windows, connected the outside to the inside, and became one with nature. Here's another Bob Brower house, the Davidson house, connecting nature. And here's another Bill Morgan house in Ormond Beach. Wonderful plate glass connecting you with nature. So these were some of the themes of mid-century modern, but it goes way beyond that. The first major mid-century modern building was the Prudential Building in 1955, and although not nearly as radical as some of the buildings that were yet to come, this did show its clean lines and all of the spirit of ideas we've talked about before and what mid-century modern is. And you can see it under construction there, and it still exists today, although no longer called the Prudential Building. It was the tallest building in Florida. It changed Jacksonville because it showed the modernism that a lazy city of Jacksonville could finally take off. Probably one of the most amazing of the skyscrapers that took place was the Gulf Life Building. It was designed by an architect named Welton Beckett. He was a California architect, and this building is known as one of the top 10 concrete pre-stressed, post-tension buildings in the world. And it's on the National Register of Concrete Buildings. And Welton Beckett was a genius. You may have seen his buildings in LA, the Capitol Records building. This was one of his well-known buildings. He was one of the top early architects we had in the United States in the early 50s and 60s. Another building, world famous, was the Milam House, designed by Paul Rudolph. Paul was influenced by many architects, Walter Gropius and others, and he went on to build an amazing building. This is his only beach house. It's at Ponte Vedra, but he designed buildings with huge cantilevered slabs and geometric forms that became world-renowned. And he was sort of the father of the Sarasota School of Architecture that made a lot of famous buildings in that area. And then there's a building designed by Bruce Goff. It's the Gelbman House, sometimes called the Butterfly Building. It was off San Jose Boulevard, and it was world-renowned. And this building, sadly, has been torn down for a mansion in its place. Bruce Goff was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, and he went on to design buildings of just untold physical shapes, like the Baffinger House in Oklahoma, or another house in Mississippi, with organic shapes, and just there was no limit of what an architect could do, and he broke the mold in every way. And Bruce Goff was one of our great architects, and unfortunately our only house in Florida was demolished. And then there's another house, another building, the Chart House. Now, this was designed by Kendrick Bang Kellogg, who was also world famous, a student of Frank Lloyd Wright. And this building is going from the early tenets of mid-century modern to rectilinear and geometric shapes to become more organic architecture, where the building actually seems to grow out of the ground and has almost no right angle in the entire building. And here you see the opposite side. If you haven't walked around the Chart House, this is still the Chart House, but it looks totally different, and it's part of that organic architecture that Kendrick Bang Kellogg made famous. Here's an aerial view with a drone. Isn't that amazing? Just the composition of this building is phenomenal. And Kendrick Van Kellogg went on to design many, many wonderful buildings. Here's the inside of the chart house with all these great wooden laminated forms that were made by ship carpenters. And it's all still there. And this is a building that we need to look forward in the future, although there's a lease on that building for a long time. It's owned by a Miami developer who someday may decide to build something in its place. We must fight that. This is one of the most significant organic buildings in Jacksonville. Here's another building by Kendrick Van Kellogg's, the Doodle House out in Palm Springs. It's out actually in the Joshua Tree area. And here's the interior. This guy was a genius. We have one of his houses here in Jacksonville, and it's precious and needs to be preserved. Here's a building that's not one of our towering gems of architecture, but it's an interesting building. The Blackstone building downtown was actually designed by the same designer who did the Fontainebleau Hotel. And he was one of the very, very famous mid-century modern buildings. Maurice Lapidour is his name. And then there's a really significant building, originally known as the Universal Marion Building, now the JEA building, and they've moved out, and this building is now empty. This 19-story building has 360,000 square feet, 8 layers of parking. It is an incredible mid-century modern building that is empty. And what are we going to do about that? I mean, it's a dilemma, because it's far enough away from the river, it's not likely that some new corporate headquarters is going to come and move in there. So my hope, and I'm starting to lobby for this, is to put the newly planned University of Florida downtown campus in this building as a vertical campus, so it doesn't take up acres and acres and acres of room. Instead of being in the fairground or way out in La Villa as planned, it's going to be consolidated right downtown, close to the art museum, close to the library, close to retail, the city hall. We need to do that. So we're behind the scenes getting some plans go, but when the time comes, I'm going to call on all of you to make sure that that's what we do, instead of putting it out in Shad Khan's fairgrounds, which would benefit nobody except for him. Yeah, and some of you may remember the Embers restaurant on the top floor. It was a rotating restaurant on the top of the Universal Marion Building. Unfortunately, the mechanism that controlled the rotation is no longer available, but the beautiful panoramic view of that is just breathtaking. And so that could be part of this amazing building, originally known as the Universal Marion Building. Next to that was also the Ivy's department store, which is part of that complex, and that will be part of the University of Florida's downtown campus. So here's Bob Broward. Bob Broward was a great character and a great mentor to me, and certainly is the designer of this building and one of my best friends. But he came out of Georgia Tech after the World War, and he had to decide if he wanted to become a professional baseball player or an architect. He chose being an architect. He was from Jacksonville. His family goes back to the 1700s. And so he was influenced very much by Frank Lloyd Wright. During his architectural training, he read an article about Frank Lloyd Wright and was immediately captivated by it. And he went to, he asked Frank Lloyd Wright if he could come help him work on the Florida Southern campus in Lakeland, which was now then under construction. And so Bob took off time from his architectural training, went down and went to the Lakeland campus and helped build that. And then later on, he went out to Taliesin West and East to become an apprentice of Frank Lloyd Wright. And he came back to Jacksonville totally influenced by the possibilities of modern architecture. Some of his early buildings this is the famous Butterfly House, but it was just a demonstration of what you can do. Instead of having a building that has a peak roof, he has a roof that makes a valley. So when it rains heavily and Jacksonville's tropical storm, the water comes down and funnels into the roof and makes a waterfall into the little fountain underneath it. just a wonderful concrete design, precast concrete. Here's the interior showing some of those same very straight lines, very beautiful in its simplicity lines that were so modern at the time. You know, all of a sudden, housewives could have appliances, washing machines, and stove tops. In fact, in the Butterfly House, we still have the original appliances in the building itself. If you ever have a chance to go see it on one of the upcoming home tours, be sure to go inside this house. Thank you, Catherine, for that. So Bob was just trying to get his career started, and one of the ideas he had, they did what's called the Parade of Homes. So they had lots of different houses that were built, and they had one idea that they would have what's called the giveaway house. They would provide free materials from all the builders in town if he would design the building with no charge. And then the people who went on the Parade of Homes to all the different homes, they would enter a drawing, and whoever won the drawing would get the house for free. And he said that particular thing got him more advertising, $10,000 worth of advertising for $1,000 worth of work. And that really kick-started his career as one of Jacksonville's great architects. And the giveaway house is still there on the south side. Here's a rare picture of the Coliseum. Now, as it turned out, George Fisher was an architect who ultimately designed the Coliseum, but Bob Brower worked for him as an early apprentice in his work, and he designed this really amazing mid-century modern version of what did not become the Coliseum. But I love it, and of course the Coliseum is torn down anyway now. One of his biggest jobs, and probably the greatest challenge of his whole career, was Wesley Manor, a huge residential development for older folks. And it was a sprawling complex of buildings. There was not a single stair in the entire building. It was all level, and each of the buildings connected with these precast concrete forms that were filled with art. One of Bob's great passions was to make sure that every building he built was filled with art by local artists. And so you see Wesley Manor here with its great concrete roof lines. And here's one of his works of art built into the architecture. Sadly, this building is in danger also. It's way out on Julian Creek, just over the Duval County line. And there are proposals to tear it all down and build a high-rise in its place. We must not have that happen. This is one of the great housing developments in all of Jacksonville, one of Bob Brower's greatest works. He did wonderful churches. There were many of them, like this church on Mandalay Road. And then there's this building. This is, as Alan said, one of his most famous buildings, one of his favorite buildings. But it also embodies all the things we talked about: natural materials, straightforward materials, cantilevered balconies, and so forth. When he got the commission from the Unitarian Church to build this, before the church was built, he set up a tent across this body of water. It was kind of a lake at the time, and camped out there for a week or two, listening to the birds and the frogs and feeling the wind and getting to know the nature and the surroundings and the herons flying over. And then he designed the building not on the other side, but on this side, so you could look across the waterway and see this great church. And I urge you, after the program is over, if you'll go out and just walk around and see what a genius idea it is. This is the outside with its original bell tower, and then the interior opens up in these wide plate glass windows. And unfortunately, our screen covers up the great tapestry, but that's one of the highlights of the building. About Memphis Wood, many of you know her. She was a great artist. And there's a picture of the tapestry when the screen's not in the way, you can see that. So he also designed many, many other buildings. He designed this along with Taylor Hardwick in partnership. The Jacksonville Art Museum, simple, elegant, beautiful. The Regency Theater, unfortunately now torn down. The Dake Residence. This was originally built, I believe, in the 1980s. It's an amazing wooden building with 4 or 5 levels. Each one rotates as it climbs up to the clerestory at the top, and it burned to the ground. And they built it back exactly the way it was. It is still there today. It's an amazing building. It's out near Queens Harbor on private property. And Franzino Residence, the original owner of the Franzino Residence is here. Raise your hand, please. Thank you very much. You designed that house. And here you see it connected with beautiful, great windows that connected with nature. And the Davidson Residence, this is an awesome residence out toward San Jose and Mandarin. This is Bob Broward. And then another house called Sunswept. Instead of the roof pointing down, it points up with these giant plate glass windows opening up on the river. And one of my favorite buildings of his is the office building in Ortega, on Ortega River. And here's a picture of the interior. Just breathtaking. What an imagination this guy had. And again, using the materials that have not been used in a way before. One of his most impressive buildings is the Klein building. It's out of Ponte Vedra with these huge cantilevered balconies built coming out of the dune and facing on to the Atlantic Ocean. And this is a building most people have not seen. It's a Southeast Toyota office building. It looks like a series of mushrooms and just organic shapes. The computer workers inside had big windows that were shaded by these canopies. And one of Bob's last buildings, he called it Wakapalaka, which means place of the cows crossing with the cow ford. And this was his own home. He and Murtis Craig lived here, and he was a very Frank Lloyd Wright home that still is there over in the St. Nicholas area. But there were other architects. Let's talk about Taylor Hardwick. Taylor came to Jacksonville and started his practice a few years before Bob Broward, and he was very much into the architecture of Eros Saarinen, and he had a very great sense of color and playfulness with concrete forms that were very imaginative. One of those is the Jacobs House out at Atlantic Beach. That's a beautiful mid-century modern beach house. One of his early houses in the late 50s was the Marion King residence. Marion King was a contractor who specialized in concrete blocks, and he wanted to see if he could use concrete blocks in a decorative fashion like nobody had ever done. And of course, Taylor took on the job, and you see this wonderful building over at Empire Point. That is the Marion King residence. Another building in Arlington was the Adair Springfield house with large geometric shapes. He built a series of schools like the Jeb Stewart, I think it's a middle school, built back in the late 50s, early 60s. And the genius of that is the administration part of the building is in the center hub with spokes going out in all directions. And each one of those are rows of classrooms. And here you see some of the ground level appearance of it. And then there was
Jeff Davis.
What's that?
Jeff Davis.
This is Jeff Davis, yes. Thank you. Unfortunately, all three of the schools were named after Confederate generals and have now been renamed, fortunately. But this was very colorful with fanciful geometrical shapes that were just a delight to the eye to see. And here's this same school with a wonderful stairway. And if you look carefully, that sort of H-shaped thing in the middle of the stairway, Taylor confessed, although he denied it at first, he later confessed that that was his monogram, standing for Hardwick. Now, he built two schools that were both the same, and they had these great diamond-shaped buildings that were just almost just wild and crazy. And so one's over on the south side and one's on the west side. And they're still there, Forest High School, and what's the other one?
Wolfson.
Wolfson, yes.
Forest is now west side.
Yeah.
Terribly.
And this is a dentist office he did, Dr. Good's office is over in St. Nicholas. And each one of those little odd-shaped pods were part of the dentist's little operatory rooms, looking out into nature, and yet privacy is involved. Probably one of his most iconic designs were the Skinner dairy stores.
Yep.
The Skinner Company was falling behind in their dairy products. They were being superseded by supermarkets. They were taking over the milk. And as delivery of milk house to house was fading away, they had the idea of having little neighborhood dairy stores everywhere in every neighborhood. And so Taylor Hardwick designed these wonderful gull wing type buildings that you could pull up on either side of your car, and one person could operate both sides, left and right, delivering milk out a sliding glass door. And although there are none of them serving as dairy stores anymore, they're found other uses as various car repair stores, barbecue restaurants, florist shops. And so there's still 19 of his original 30 or so of these dairy stores. Very cool. Perhaps his most well-known building and deservedly most famous was the Hayden Burns Library. You know, when this building was built, they tore down Clutho's old city hall with its big copper dome. It was the pride of the city when it was built back after the Great Fire. But by the 1950s, it had become passé. It was no longer big enough. It was old-fashioned. And so Taylor Hardwick was assigned to design a new, earth-shaking, futuristic library. And this was it. 50 years later, it was kind of kitsch, and people said it's kind of ugly, and it wasn't big enough anymore. It's kind of fashion. So they were going to tear it down and build a new library over on Laura Street. Thank God they didn't. The DuPont Fund came in at the end and rehabilitated the building. And during this time, fins on cars were cool. And this building has fins. And it's part of the mid-century modern scope. It covered arts and crafts, automobiles, furniture, buildings. It's all part of the same movement. You see the beautiful decorative glazed bricks that were part of the design of the building. This is all part of the Hayden Burns Library with a puppet theater. It's still there, not quite as ornate as it usually first was. Then following that, we had the Fletcher Building on Riverside Avenue with a huge cantilever canopy over the balcony. It was really neat with its unusual shaped windows. And finally, his design for Friendship Park with all kinds of circles interlocking and circling each other, and most of all this has been destroyed. Over on the left, you see, well, here is the fountain itself. It was the tallest fountain in the United States when it was built. In the bottom, you see the pump house, which is a snail-like fixture. It's still there. And the most wonderful part was the Harbor Master's building, now torn down. Unfortunately, they tore it down to build a restaurant. But that is so cool. That's just out of the Jetsons movie. It's like a flying saucer. And what a shame that that's no longer with us. And there's the pump house still there. So hopefully, we expect in the next few months to have the great fountain spewing high into the air as part of our downtown decorations. And then there was Bill Morgan. Bill Morgan was one of my favorites. He was an internationally known genius who started here in Jacksonville and went on to use concrete in a way that nobody else had thought about using before. And he was certainly one of the masters of mid-century modern. This building is still there on Arlington Expressway, down the street, just about a mile. And this is the house on Arlington, the Rawls house. You can see it's cantilevered out, so it's like a pedestal in the middle with the wings of the house sticking out. And on the other side, facing the water, it's all glass. Here's the Goodloe house out of Ponte Vedra Beach, a wonderful concoction of shapes and geometry that unfortunately was torn down to build a McMansion beach house. Here's the Hatcher house in Empire Point, another one of his buildings. It is kind of a spiral. You can't see it here, but every layer moves up and up and up as you go around the circles to have balconies and different layers. It's a wonderful house still there. And here's the Dickinson house out at Atlantic Beach, and it's similar to the Rawls house in that it's based on a pedestal, but it's more akin to the great Aztec and Mayan temples as it faces the river, faces the ocean. Here you see the downtown police memorial building, terraces, and there actually are urban parks on the top of it, but after a few years the police deemed it too dangerous to have a park on top of the police building, so they removed it. Now it's more planned, but it's a wonderful, almost pyramidal shaped building. And here's the Dickinson house facing the ocean. So there's something wonderful going on here. If you haven't seen this, you may have seen pictures of it. Atlantic Beach, along Beach Avenue, is one of the most special places in all of Duval County. On the left, you see the Dune House, which is a playful apartment. There's two apartments under the ground that are unlike anything else in all of Jacksonville. Next to that is the big A-frame that was Morgan's own residence. And then to the right of that is a very strong mid-century modern building designed for Dylan Morgan, his son. So these are just three buildings, and just to be able to see these in one composition facing on the ocean are just remarkable. And there's an interesting story on this. Back after Hurricane Dora came along, it wiped out most all the houses along a big stretch of the beach in Atlantic Beach. And Morgan loves buildings that are built on terraces and cliffs and on great pyramids. And so he bought all this area for 2 blocks. He owned it. And gradually, over a period of 20 years, he built buildings of his own design and sold them one at a time, not all at once. And so he got to design all these buildings for a 2-block area. There were over 10 of these wonderful mid-century moderns, each of them different in character, featuring all of Morgan's great concepts of architecture from his long career. So like any place else, no place else on earth, there is this collection of a great architect's work in this one compact area that is a true wonder. I call it Morgan's Road. The first building along here was the A-frame house. It was Morgan's own house. And it was featured in magazines all over the world. The most famous was on Playboy magazine. They featured it as one of their Playboy mansions. Of course, Morgan being Playboy, but the house was got worldwide recognition. Here's a close-up of the Dune House, as it's called. Each of those 2 islets represent one apartment building. And you can see glass doors coming out to the ocean. Here's a picture of the Dune House from the inside, looking out toward the ocean. Then his son Dylan's house is just an amazing concoction of geometric shapes. And these are all along the road on Beach Avenue and 16th Street. Here's another one of those houses along Morgan's Road, and another one, each one totally different, and yet expressing the same architectural ideals that Morgan was able to create during his long career. I love this one. This is the condominium beach house two units. Look almost like a flying saucer landed on the beach, right at the corner of Beach Avenue and 19th Street. And here's another one. And here's a tree house. So it's amazing to have this still available. I urge you to go out and see it. You can go down the road and see it without permission as long as you don't go very hard. It's a wonderful occasion to see that. He also did the Daniel office building, which is unfortunately now a parking garage for the Hyatt downtown. But the terraces and the shapes like a Mayan temple are still part of his ideal. And his great Methodist United Church out at Jacksonville Beach recently won the Test of Time Award for Morgan's great architecture. Here's the interior of that building. You can see it has all freestanding with no columns inside. And one of his last buildings I love is the Drysdale building out at Atlantic Beach. And here you see cantilevers. If you didn't understand cantilevers before, I hope my talk will help you understand what magical things can be done with his architecture. William Morgan, Bob Broward, and Taylor Hartley all died within a year and a half of each other, 1814 to 1816. So they were dear friends, and they changed Jacksonville architecture forever. They were among our greats. We did a movie about them called Champions of the Future. But they weren't the only architects. I mean, there were lots of architects who did this, one of which is Ted Pappas, who is the only architect who's still living in your book I did, Jackson's Architectural Heritage. And he worked in the offices of many of these architects, Bob Broward and Taylor Hartley. Here's his Greek Orthodox Church on Atlantic Boulevard, Broadview Terrace. Now, this shows the wide variety of buildings that we still call mid-century modern. This is more brutalist architecture. And it's just one of the phases that was brought about in this movement. And brutalist doesn't mean that it's brutal. Brut actually is a term that was developed in France, meaning made of concrete. And so he's used concrete in ways to build these wonderful decorative areas. The most beautiful of which I think is Assumption Catholic Church. It's on Arlington Boulevard. It's a wonderful work of sculpture. If you look at it from the ground, you can't see it at all. You can't see this wonderful look of sculpture in addition to being a building. But it is that. And if you go inside, the light penetrates through these slits in the building and become like stained glass. Another of Pappas's great buildings is the library out at Neptune Beach. And perhaps one of my favorites is the Mary Singleton Senior Center. Here you see it from the air from the drone. But what amazing geometry this building has. And it's also a very successful building on the inside. Oh, I'm out of order, but there's another picture of Beach's Library. And another architect that's not widely known that I'll mention briefly, Robert Ernest Griffith. He was a young 28-year-old architect who was just a genius. And he was written up in many magazines to be probably one of the great architects in America. He designed two great buildings before he died. He died of cancer at the age of 29. But his first building was his home out at Atlantic Beach. This one you see with the big glass windows. And then he built a building over in Clifton that is just a remarkable interlocking series of glazed concrete blocks that are still there, and a wonderful building in itself. And here's a design to get an idea of how complicated it was. And sadly, we lost it. There's another building nearby that we need to know about. This is the Arlington Federal Savings Bank. It was designed by a very important architect, Edwin T. Reeder from Miami, who did great buildings down in South Florida. This building is now scheduled to be torn down and made into a car wash. It must not happen. This is one of the great mid-century modern buildings in Jacksonville with its we call it brise de soleil, a sunscreen that filters light as it comes through. Complex and wonderful. And the Old Arlington Association is mounting a major effort to save this building. It's going out before the Historic Preservation Commission, and what's scheduled to go tomorrow is going to be up in 2 weeks. I want as many of you as possible to be there to lobby to save this building. It's being fought very hard for by the developers who want to tear it down, but we have to save this. We have so few of these great gems of architecture left. It's incumbent on us who care about this stuff to save it. Perhaps one of the most dramatic mid-century modern buildings is also out at Jacksonville Beach, designed by Blake Ellis, an architect from Atlanta. And this is St. Paul's by the Sea. Many people don't even know this exists because it's back from the main road. So wow, what a building that is, taking on some forms of seashells and maybe seabirds. Here's a picture of it from the sky. You can see its complexity. And again, this would not happen without new forms of concrete, mid-century modern. Here's a round building, also in Arlington. It's called Geodesica. It's up in the northeastern part of Arlington. It was designed by a very unusual architect named Gilbert Spindell. And he built buildings, a few buildings in Jacksonville, but most of them he did in plan books. So you could order books that he would draw the plans, and he would build them for you anywhere you wanted to. In fact, there are 7 buildings almost exactly like this building all over the southeastern United States. And this round building, as you see from Spindell's plans, is a totally round house. It's like nothing else, and it's still there. Here's another building by Gilbert Spindell, one of the ones in his sales brochure, where you can buy house plans for like $12. George Fisher, I mentioned earlier, he was one of the mid-century modern architects, and here's a house, the Massey House out in San Jose, and it looks kind of plain, but if you look at it, it is the quintessential ranch-style house. It's got a parking porte-cochere over on the right, long horizontal lines, a thin band of windows along the top, which on the other side open into a big courtyard that faces nature, so it's got protection from the street. And it's a genius building. It's still there, the Massey residence. And here's another building by George Fisher out of Atlantic Beach, the Chaplin House. It got torn down 2 years ago, just as I was writing the book Jacksonville Architectural Heritage. This was going to be a major building in the book. It got torn down for a mansion. Sad day. And there are many other buildings that you get the idea. Mid-century modern buildings all around us. This one's downtown Cummings Chapel. Wow. This building is amazing. Designed by Kemp Funch Jackson. This is the parking garage for the Old Atlanta Bank, designed by Herbert Coons. And it's a mid-century modern masterpiece in itself, and yet it's a parking garage. And one of the most quirky and unusual mid-century modern buildings in Jacksonville is Beaver Street Baptist Church. It looks like a cross between a crown and a flying saucer. Just fantastic. Here's a nearby building in Arlington by Bill Broadfoot, another young architect. Brooks Haas was another architect. This church is on University Boulevard, just past JU. It's a beautiful church. And Brooks Haas also did several buildings on the JU campus. JU was built in the 1950s. So it's got a lot of mid-century modern buildings as part of the campus, including Swisher Gymnasium, the Arts Building, Swisher Library. And so here's the building. You say, well, why are you showing that one? I'm wrapping up with this because, as Howard mentioned earlier, when the bridges opened, the Matthews Bridge and the Hart Bridge, it allowed a huge building boom in the 1950s and 60s. And so Arlington is where there was just endless mid-century modern buildings, many of them not fancy like the ones we've seen by the by the greater architects, but hundreds and hundreds of ranch houses and buildings that have this mid-century modern aesthetic. And so Arlington has probably the greatest collection of mid-century modern buildings overall of any other part of Jacksonville. And it should be a historic district. And even buildings like this that are contributing structures are part of that great historic fabric of the mid-century modern buildings in Arlington. So Bob Broward told me some important things, and he was a great influence to me. He said Jacksonville is probably one of the greatest places on earth to build a city, if you think about it. We're at the crook of the great St. Johns River. We're just a mile or two from the great ocean. We have trees, and we're a transportation connection. Perhaps no other city on earth other than Paris, France, is a better place to build a city like Jacksonville. Will we squander it? Will it be a great city? Or will it be something that our leadership does not take advantage of the great opportunities we have? So I'd like to let Bob Broward talk to you for just a minute and tell you what he thought about it.
No question about it. Downtown Jacksonville will survive. It will grow into a great, thriving metropolis. But the real question is, will it be a thing of quality? Will it be a thing that is truly great and beautiful, or will it be a mere unrelated mass of buildings without any regard really for the portrait of human life? Will it draw into its soul poets and artists and creative people that will even make it evolve into more of a great city? What will it be physically? Will it be a place of real beauty? Will it be a place that it will be a delight to walk through and see and to feel both in the night and the day? Will it really be this? It can be this if we will dedicate ourselves to an ideal and commit ourselves to a beautiful city.
And we have a huge park there that spoke to all citizens and gave access to the river to all citizens. And that would have been the beginning, in my opinion, of what downtown could have developed into. I would love to see the city quit trying to be another city. The biggest thing that hurts Jacksonville is that Jacksonville doesn't believe in itself. What can I do to make this not just a good old city? What can I do to make this one of the greatest cities on earth? Not big, but one of the greatest cities on earth.
And let's make this one of the great cities